planning has been, I think, quite the project.
Yeah, it's definitely stressful.
There were a lot of families in a similar situation, but it was very different in the sense that, like, my family was on television.
First and foremost shows that no person is above the law, regardless of their status in society, regardless of their wealth, regardless of their fame.
There is a timeline that nobody in mainstream media wants to talk about. A timeline that starts with a cable network, a family of 19 children, and a ratings hit that made millions of dollars. And it ends with 2 arrests, a victim whose name we may never know, and a network that has gone completely, deliberately, and suspiciously silent. TLC made millions from the Duggar family. They knew this family's history. They put cameras back in that home. Anyway, and now in 2026, they have not said a single word. Today, we are going to walk through everything, the full timeline, the legal exposure, the unanswered questions, and the one voice that has been telling the truth all along that most people dismissed. If you have been following this story, buckle in, because what I am about to show you connects dots that will genuinely change how you see this entire situation. If this kind of deep dive accountability content is what you are looking for, hit like and subscribe right now. I cover these stories with the detail they deserve, and I do not stop until we have gone all the way to the bottom. Now let's get into it. Let's start with the business side of this, because that is the angle that keeps getting ignored. When people talk about the Duggars, they talk about the family, they talk about religion, about the children, about Josh. What they rarely talk about is the corporation sitting behind all of it, with a camera, a production deal, and a revenue stream. TLC, which stands for The Learning Channel, a name that has aged in fascinating ways, aired 19 kids and counting for 10 full seasons from 2008 to 2015. 10 seasons. That is not a small commitment. That is a network that looked at this family, saw ratings gold, and kept renewing, kept filming, kept profiting. The show was a genuine hit. It pulled in millions of viewers per episode at its peak. It launched the Duggar name into mainstream American culture. It made Jim, Bob and Michelle Duggar into household names. And it made TLC significant money through advertising, revenue, through international licensing, through merchandise and spin-off content. The Duggar family was, for a period of time, one of TLC's most valuable properties. That word, property, is worth sitting with for a moment, because that is exactly how a television network thinks about a show. Not as people, as a property. Now in 2015, the first crisis hit. Information came out about Josh Duggar's past behaviour, conduct that had occurred over a decade earlier, involving minors, including his own sisters. The public reaction was swift and severe. Advertisers pulled out. The social media pressure was immediate, and TLC cancelled 19 Kids and Counting. From a pure business perspective, that was the rational decision. The property had become a liability. Cut it loose, protect the brand, move on. But here is where it gets complicated, because TLC did not actually move on. What TLC did was something far more calculated. They looked at the ruins of the Duggar brand and decided that the problem was not the family, the problem was Josh. So their solution was to sideline Josh and repackage the rest. They launched a spin-off called Counting On, which focused on the younger Duggar siblings, the ones who had, at least on the surface, no documented history of misconduct. They filmed courtships, they filmed weddings, they filmed pregnancies and births and adorable babies in matching outfits. And one of the primary storylines in Counting On was the relationship between Joseph Duggar and Kendra Caldwell, their courtship, their engagement, their marriage, their children. Think about what that decision represents. In 2015, TLC had just been forced to cancel a show because of the family's internal dysfunction, and specifically because a pattern of harmful behaviour within the family had been exposed and could no longer be ignored. Their response to that situation was not to step back from the family entirely. Their response was to find the members of the family who hadn't been exposed yet and build a new show around them, the innocent generation, the fresh faces, the ones who could give TLC a clean slate while trading on the exact same family name, the exact same audience, and the exact same brand that had made 19 Kids profitable in the first place. The question that needs to be asked about that decision, and I have not seen a single Entertainment journalist Ask It Seriously is this: what due diligence did TLC conduct before recommitting to this family? After 2015, before cameras went back into the Duggar household, before another production contract was signed, before Joseph and Kendra's relationship became a TLC storyline, and did anyone at that network conduct an independent child welfare review? Did they bring in any outside consultants? Did they establish any duty of care protocols for a production that would involve filming minors inside a family with a now documented history of harm? And if they did not do those things, if they simply made the calculation that the new Duggars were marketable and moved forward, what does that tell us about how TLC viewed its responsibilities? Now let's talk about the timeline that I believe is the most important piece of this entire story, because this is not just about what happened before TLC got involved. This is about what happened while TLC was actively filming. Joseph Duggar was arrested on March 18th, 2026. The charges relate to an incident that allegedly took place during a family vacation in Florida in 2020. Hold that date in your mind and put it next to this one. Counting On's final season aired in 2021 before TLC cancelled it following Josh Duggar's federal conviction, which means that in 2020, when the alleged Florida incident took place, TLC's production apparatus was fully active and engaged with this family. The cameras were on. The production crew was in contact with the family. The network had an ongoing professional and financial relationship with Joseph Duggar specifically. He was one of the featured personalities on their show. Let's think about what that means practically. Television production is not a distant relationship. When a network films a reality show with a family, there is a level of access and familiarity that goes far beyond what most people imagine. Production teams know the family's schedules. They coordinate travel. They are often aware of family dynamics, relationship tensions, internal conflicts, because understanding those things is part of how you make compelling television. Producers build relationships with their subjects. They communicate regularly. They are, in some cases, almost a constant presence in those families' lives. So the question is not an abstract legal one. The question is a human and practical one. In 2020, during the production period of Counting On, did anyone in TLC's orbit, any producer, any crew member, any network executive who had ongoing contact with this family know anything, hear anything? Observe anything that in retrospect connects to what we now know happened during that Florida trip? And if anyone did, what did they do with that information? I want to be precise here because I think precision matters. I am not saying TLC knew about the alleged incident. I am not claiming that any specific person at TLC witnessed or was informed of what allegedly happened. What I am saying is that the timing creates a question that deserves a real answer. TLC was filming this family in 2020. The alleged incident occurred in 2020. Those two facts exist in the same sentence, and they have not been seriously examined anywhere in mainstream media coverage of this story. Now let's talk about the legal dimension, because I think this is where things get very interesting. In the criminal case, TLC is not a party. The criminal case is about Joseph Duggar and what the prosecution can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But criminal liability and civil liability are two very different things. And the world of civil litigation operates on a much broader set of theories than criminal prosecution does. There is a legal concept called negligent supervision. There is a legal concept called negligent enablement. There are tort theories around failure to report, around duty of care, around what a party knew or should have known in the course of a business relationship. I'm not a lawyer, and nothing in this video is legal advice. But I can tell you that in cases where media companies and production entities have profited from environments where harm to minors subsequently came to light, plaintiffs' attorneys have explored exactly these kinds of theories. The question of what a production company knew, when they knew it, and whether their actions or inactions contributed to an environment in which harm became possible, these are questions that civil courts have been willing to hear. Here is what makes the legal picture genuinely complicated for TLC, if it ever comes to that. Production records are discoverable in civil litigation. Emails between TLC producers and Duggar family members are discoverable. Internal communications about what the production team knew regarding family dynamics are discoverable. Contracts, schedules, travel coordination documents, all of it is potentially discoverable. If a civil case were ever filed and if TLC were named as a party, their entire archive of communications with this family during the counting on production period could potentially become part of the legal record. And that, I would argue, is precisely why TLC has said absolutely nothing since Joseph's arrest. This is not an oversight. This is not a communications department that simply hasn't gotten around to it. Since March 18, 2026, TLC has issued 0 public statements about Joseph Duggar's arrest. No expression of concern for the alleged victim. No acknowledgement that they filmed and financially benefited from this individual's public image. No statement about the end of their relationship with the Duggar franchise. Nothing. Compare that to 2015. In 2015, when Josh Duggar's past came out, TLC cancelled 19 kids relatively quickly. There was public pressure, yes, but the network also made statements. They engaged with the situation. In 2026, facing a situation that is in many ways more directly connected to their production activities, because this allegedly occurred during the production period of their active show, they have gone silent. Silence from a corporation in the face of a scandal is rarely accidental. Silence is a legal strategy. When a company's attorneys advise saying nothing, it is because saying anything creates a record, creates admissions, creates exposure. The silence coming from TLC right now is not neutral. It is not them simply staying out of it. It is a calculated legal posture, and the fact that they are adopting that posture tells you something important about what they are worried about. Now let's zoom out and put this in a bigger context, because the Duggar situation, as shocking as it is not unique. It is part of a pattern in the reality television industry that has been building for decades. The reality television format at its core is an extractive enterprise. It finds people whose lives are interesting or who can be made to seem interesting, and it turns those lives into content. The more dramatic, the more conflict-driven, the more unusual the family structure or belief system or circumstances, the more valuable the content becomes. And what that incentive structure creates is a systematic pressure toward filming environments that are, from a duty of care perspective, high risk. Shows about large families with unusual religious structures and limited outside oversight. Shows that film children extensively, making their lives and relationships and development into entertainment products. Shows that embed production crews into intimate family dynamics where tensions and dysfunction exist, but where the cameras are pointed at the joy and the chaos and the wholesome moments, not at what is actually happening beneath the surface. The reality television industry does not have uniform mandatory duty of care standards. There is no federal regulation that requires a production company to conduct welfare checks when filming minors. There is no mandatory reporting protocol that applies specifically to production crews. The standards that exist vary by state, by contract, by network, and in many cases, the incentive structure of the industry actively works against the kind of careful, protective oversight that should exist when cameras are in the homes of families with children. The Duggar case, and I want to be clear that I am talking about both brothers now, because the pattern here matters, may become a catalyst for a conversation that the industry has been successfully avoiding. What is a network's duty of care when they profit from filming a family? At what point does a production company's access to and financial relationship with a family create a legal and ethical obligation to that family's members, including its most vulnerable members? If legislation were proposed, and there have been proposals in various forms around child performer protections and family reality show regulation, the Duggar case might be exactly the kind of high-profile, undeniable example that moves that conversation forward. Let me tell you what I think is going to happen, and I want to be transparent that this is analysis, not reporting. I believe that if any civil litigation is filed in connection with the Florida incident, TLC will move very quickly to settle. I believe they will make any settlement as quiet as possible and attach confidentiality requirements to ensure their production records never become public. The last thing TLC wants is for a civil discovery process to open up their internal communications from the counting on production years. Whatever those communications do or do not contain, the process of discovery itself and the public exposure of what a major cable network knew about the Duggar family while they were actively profiting from that family, what would be reputationally catastrophic. I put the likelihood of a quiet settlement if civil litigation is filed at very high. Not because that settlement would represent accountability, but because it would represent the most effective way for TLC to make this go away without ever having to answer the questions that most need answering. And that is a frustrating outcome to anticipate because the questions deserve answers. The victim in this case and the broader public deserve to know whether a major American media company had any information, any awareness, any warning signs during the years they were filming this family and what they chose to do or not do with that information. Here is where I want to bring in a voice that I think has been significantly undervalued in how we understand this entire story. Jill Duggar, now Jill Dillard, wrote a memoir. She has spoken publicly and at length about her experience growing up inside the Duggar family. And what she described was not what TLC broadcast. The show that TLC put on the air was a portrait of a large, faith-filled, loving, if unconventional family. What Jill described was something considerably different. She talked about financial control. She talked about a lack of autonomy that went far beyond what most people would recognize as a normal family structure. She talked about the gap between the image that was constructed for cameras and television and public consumption and the actual lived reality of being a child in that household. At the time Jill's memoir and interviews came out, there was a segment of the public, say, including many former viewers of the shows who were willing to hear her out. There was also significant pushback. People who felt she was exaggerating, people who felt she was being disloyal to her family, people who suggested that her account was coloured by her own personal grievances or her distance from the family's faith community. That is the kind of dismissal that women, and particularly women from conservative religious backgrounds, often face when they come forward with accounts that challenge a beloved public image. But here's the thing about Jill's account now in 2026 with two brothers under arrest. Her credibility has been significantly reinforced by subsequent events. What Jill described was not a family with a few isolated problem members. She described a systemic environment, a structure of authority, control, information management, and image maintenance that shaped every member of that family. And the pattern of arrests, beginning with Josh's federal conviction in 2021 and continuing now with Joseph's arrest in 2026, does not look like isolated incidents. It looks like what Jill was trying to describe all along, an environment that produced harm repeatedly and that had mechanisms for keeping that harm invisible to outsiders. TLC put cameras in that environment. They broadcast a curated, carefully managed version of that environment to millions of people. And Jill, who grew up in that environment, tried to tell us something important about the difference between the version TLC showed and the version that actually existed. If anyone is owed a public reckoning by TLC, it is Jill Duggar. Because her account and TLC's programming existed in direct contradiction for years, and the evidence has now moved decisively in the direction of her account. There is also a deeper question about what we as the audience are complicit in when we consume this kind of content. I am not here to make anyone feel guilty for having watched 19 Kids and Counting or Counting On. These were widely available, heavily promoted shows on a major cable network. Watching them was a normal thing to do. But the cultural appetite for content about large, unusual families, content that frames their lifestyle as entertaining, that invites us into their homes and their relationships and their milestones, that appetite is part of what creates the financial incentive for networks like TLC to keep making these shows, even when the warning signs are visible. The 2015 cancellation of 19 Kids was driven almost entirely by public pressure and advertiser pullout. TLC did not cancel the show because they independently decided it was the right thing to do. They cancelled it because the commercial calculus changed. And then, as soon as they thought they could repackage the brand in a way that would be commercially viable again, through Counting On, through the younger Duggars, through the framing of a new untainted generation, they did exactly that. The decision to greenlight Counting On was not made despite TLC's knowledge of the family's history. It was made with full knowledge of that history and a commercial judgment that the history was manageable. That judgment, in retrospect, looks catastrophically wrong. Not just morally wrong, though I believe it was, but practically wrong. The environment that TLC returned to film in 2015 and continued filming through 2021 was not a reformed family that had processed its history and emerged healthier. It was the same environment with the same structures, the same authority dynamics, the same management of image and information. The problems did not leave with Josh. And TLC, if they had asked the right questions and commissioned the right independent review before recommitting to this family, might have had reason to understand that instead they took the commercially convenient path. They pointed the cameras at the weddings and the baby announcements and the family dinners. They built storylines around courtships and faith and the joy of large family life. And the audience watched, and the ratings were sufficient, and the ad revenue came in, and TLC continued to profit from the Duggar name until the situation became commercially untenable a second time. Let me be very clear about what I am arguing, because I want this to land precisely. I am not saying that TLC created the Duggar family's problems. I am not saying that absent a television deal, everything would have been fine. The family's internal dynamics, the authority structure, the control mechanisms, the environment that both Josh and Joseph appear to have operated within, those pre-existed TLC, and they are fundamentally the family's responsibility. The people who committed alleged harm are responsible for their actions. That is not in question. What I am saying is that TLC made a choice to profit from this family while those dynamics continued. They made a second choice to return and profit again after the first crisis. They filmed inside this environment during the period when the alleged Florida incident took place. And they have now made a third choice, and the choice to say nothing, to remain silent, to offer not even a statement of concern for an alleged victim while they continue to broadcast other content and collect advertising revenue on other shows. Those three choices together form a picture. And the picture is of a corporation that treated this family as a revenue stream, conducted insufficient due diligence about the safety of the environment it was filming in, and is now hoping that its silence will protect it from accountability. That picture does not reflect well on TLC. And it reflects poorly on an industry that has been allowed to operate for decades without the kind of mandatory duty of care standards that should govern anyone who puts cameras in the homes of families with children. Here is where we are left. The criminal case against Joseph Duggar will proceed through the legal system on its own terms. That process is separate from what I have been discussing. Today, the question of TLC's responsibility, moral, ethical, and potentially legal, is a parallel story that is going to develop slowly, quietly, and probably without the kind of public confrontation that this situation actually warrants. Networks have communications departments and legal teams and crisis management consultants whose entire job is to minimize public exposure in situations like this. TLC will rely on all of those resources. The silence will likely continue. And unless civil litigation forces some part of that story into public view, we may never get the answers that we should be demanding. But I believe the questions deserve to be on the record. I believe that the pattern, the profits, the return, the filming during 2020, the silence in 2026 deserves to be named out loud. Accountability does not only happen in courtrooms, it also happens in public discourse, in the conversations that audiences have about what they expect from the media they consume, in the pressure that viewers can apply when a network's behaviour falls below a standard of basic decency. TLC made millions from the Duggar family. They did so with full knowledge of the family's documented history of harm. They were present and filming during the year the alleged Florida incident occurred. They have said nothing since the arrest. And the one person who tried to tell the public the truth about what this family was actually like, Jill Duggar-Dillard, has been vindicated by history in a way that should make every one of us reconsider how quickly we dismissed her. A network that makes money filming a family has a responsibility that extends beyond ratings and revenue. The cameras create access, the contracts create relationships, the profit motive creates incentive, and all of that together creates a duty that in this case appears not to have been taken seriously. TLC's silence right now is not neutral. In the face of what has been revealed, silence is a choice. And choices in the end have consequences. The next video in this series is the one that I have genuinely struggled with the most to write. We are going to talk about Joseph and Kendra's 4 children. What kasser its way, what happens to them now, what the courts are likely to decide, and what the research tells us about outcomes for children in situations like this one. It is not an easy conversation, but it is a necessary one. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it, because it is coming very soon.